Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is a DigitalOcean tech talk called Securing Your Kubernetes Ingress with Let's Encrypt. It's March 15th, 2022, and my name is Kim Schlesinger. Welcome. We're really glad to have you here. So, a little information on what we're up to today. So, this is our agenda. I'm going to do an introduction of myself and an overview of what I'm going to be covering today. And then I'll be doing a demo that will show you all of these steps. And then at the end, we will do a recap, just reviewing what we learned. And I'll answer any questions you have in the chat. So, starting with some introductions. So, first thing is if you're watching, I would love to hear from you in the chat. So, tell me maybe who you are and where you're watching from, what brought you to this talk today. I'd love to hear, I love hearing where people are throughout the world when they're watching these talks. So, again, if you're watching in the chat, please respond. Let me know who you are, where are you watching from, and this is optional, what brought you to today's talk. And while we're waiting for some of those responses, I would just want to say hi. My name is Kim Schlesinger. I'm a developer advocate at DigitalOcean. I focus on teaching people about cloud native technologies, especially Kubernetes. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Excellent. So we've got lots of folks watching and saying hello. So we'll go through some of those. So we've got Saghar from India. Welcome. It's really nice to have you. Najibez saying hello. Welcome. Great to have you. Alex is a software developer from Denmark. Wonderful. We've got lots of different places all over the world. Great to have you, Alex. We've got Matson from Austria. Wonderful. Harsh from India. Welcome. Sabith K from India. Great to have you here. Got Matt from Victoria, British Columbia in Canada. Wonderful. Welcome, Randy from Sarasota, Florida in the US. Paulino, hello from Singapore. Great to have you. Petru, hello. Glad to see you here. Gianluca is a backend developer from Italy. Wonderful to have you. Swami is watching from Fort Worth, Texas in the USA. Guy saying bonjour. Kim, hello, Guy. Nice to see you. Katsta is from the United Kingdom and is hoping to learn some basics about Kubernetes. Excellent. You can do that here. Xuan Lin is a software developer from Singapore. Matthias from Cologne, Germany. Wonderful to have you here. Oh, Najib says they're from Algeria. Great. Ooh, Juliet, welcome from Joshua Tree, California in the US. Ej from Nigeria. You're interested in cloud computing. Outstanding. All right. Got Neo from Cape Town, South Africa, who's a DevOps engineer. Milanko from Serbia, welcome. Angel Q from New York, hello. Petru from Bucharest, Romania. Evans from Ghana, holy moly, we've got people from all over the place. Gautier from Poland, people from Tunisia. Okay, I think I've got too many more people just to call out loud. So it is wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much. Got people from literally all over the world, and that's like a real honor. So thank you for joining me. If you don't know, let's see, Bleeb84 asks, am I the only one watching on Twitch? We stream this on a lot of different platforms. So Twitch, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So we're using a piece of software called StreamYard that lets us stream to all those platforms all at once and then bring all of the chat together in one stream. So great to have you. So again, I'm Kim. This is Securing Your Kubernetes Ingress. Looks like we have a range of different experiences. So some people are software developers, some people are DevOps engineers, some people have a lot of experience, some people are just curious about what's this Kubernetes thing. Wonderful. We're great to I'm glad to have you here. And feel free to ask questions in the chat as I go. I'll do my best to stop and answer them. I usually, get through a concept and then look at the chat. And so we'll go from there. So welcome. So who is this talk for? So we just laid out a lot of different people who are watching. And so we have this framework that we like to use at DigitalOcean talking about someone's Kubernetes journey. And this can be someone who's a Kubernetes learner. So maybe you're learning Kubernetes and you haven't had an opportunity to use that system in a production setting at a company. Or you're actually at a company, you're trying to build a Kubernetes cluster and make it production ready for your business. Both of those people, the learners and the people who are already working with Kubernetes in production, there's this journey in adopting Kubernetes. And the first step we call day one operations. And that's where you decide, okay, I'm going to use Kubernetes and I'm going to create a cluster somehow. Maybe you build that cluster yourself, you get computing instances from a cloud provider. At DigitalOcean, we call those droplets, and you bootstrap Kubernetes on your own. Or maybe you use a managed Kubernetes service, which makes that process a little bit easier. But no matter what you do, you get a Kubernetes cluster. And so you're ready to play in there. And then you deploy some applications, you follow some tutorials, you get the basics down of Kubernetes. Now, even though it's basic, it's not easy. But we call that day one operations, where you've decided on Kubernetes, you're able to get a cluster up and running, and then you're able to deploy an application. And then the next part of the Kubernetes journey is a big leap, and it can take a lot of time. And we call that day two operations. And that's where you have a stable cluster up and running. You've got something deployed in your Kubernetes cluster, but now you want to make that cluster production ready. You want to have traffic from the internet coming into your cluster, and you want it to be safe and reliable. And so we call that day two operations. And some of those things can look like adding logging, monitoring what's going on in your Kubernetes cluster and being able to monitor the health of your applications inside of the cluster, maybe doing backups, optimizing the cluster so that it's running well and it's performant, and then ingress and security. And so in today's talk, I'm going to be covering two things. We're going to be talking about Kubernetes ingress. So how do you get traffic into your cluster? And I won't be covering the whole gamut of what it means to have a secure cluster, but what we're doing today is enabling TLS termination so that your traffic into your cluster and out of your cluster is a lot safer. So that's what we're going to be covering today. It's not an intro to Kubernetes talk. You are absolutely welcome to stay if you're new to Kubernetes, but we have some other talks and tutorials that cover that. But we're going to be talking about Kubernetes ingress and security, which is one part of making a production-ready cluster. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be giving you my own version of the instructions that are in this particular tutorial. So this is called the DigitalOcean Starter Kit. We also call it Day 2 Operations Ready, DigitalOcean Kubernetes for Developers. It's a mouthful. And so if you want to do this on your own, this is the place where you want to go. It has wonderful instructions. And so what we're doing today is chapter 3, and it talks about how to install and configure an ingress controller. And then there are two options in the kit. You can either use Ambassador Labs, Ingress Controller, or NGINX. What I'm going to be showing you today is NGINX. So if you click here, and this is the set of instructions for what I'm going to show you. So if you want to follow along, do step by step, I recommend following along with this, doing this on your own. I've adapted it and changed it a little bit for this presentation, but this is a wonderful resource. We've shared it in the chat. And we still have some people saying hi. It's wonderful to see you all. So welcome. All right, let's go back. So I'm doing an adapted version of the starter kit. If you're watching this in the future or you're watching this live and you want to try this on your own after the talk, I recommend doing chapter 3 of the starter kit there. And then if you are planning on following along, there are some prerequisites, what you need to have installed and ready to go. And so the first thing is you need to have a DigitalOcean account. You sign up with email and a password, and you put in some form of payment. And so I'm going to be using a DigitalOcean managed Kubernetes cluster for the talk today. And I'll show you, actually, I'm not going to show you how to do that, but you'll see me interacting with that. And then a Kubernetes cluster. So I've already created a DigitalOcean managed Kubernetes cluster, and so you'll need that. You'll also need a domain of your own. And so this is the thing that might take you the longest to set up. So I bought a domain. It's called kubetips.online. But we're going to be linking a domain with our DigitalOcean load balancer, so traffic can come into the cluster and people can use a domain, not just an IP address. So domain you own. And then the tools that I'm going to be using, command line tools, I'm going to be using Helm, which is like the package management system for Kubernetes. I'm going to be using Doctal, which is DigitalOcean's command line tool. I'm going to be using Kube Control, which is the command line tool that lets you interact with the Kubernetes API. And then I'm going to be using curl to do some testing. So you'll want to have all those things installed before you get started. And then in terms of like knowledge and skills, you'll be best served if you have some experience with a Kubernetes cluster. So if you've done a getting started with Kubernetes tutorial, or you've been maybe working with Kubernetes as a developer and you've used some kube control commands, you want to have some concept of Kubernetes. You also want to have some familiarity with your domain name registrar's process for updating records. It's not too bad, but every domain registrar is different. And so just having some facility with that. And then you want to have just a knowledge of certificate authorities and certificates to enable TLS. So sort of know, why do you want to use Let's Encrypt to generate a certificate? What's that going to do for you? All right, we've got a question from Andre. They say, Kim, will there be a cert-manager for Kubernetes also? And yes, this is the diagram of what I'm going to be building today. And it's kind of a complicated diagram. But if you look over here, we are going to be installing cert-manager, which is going to communicate with Let's Encrypt, which is going to give us a certificate that we have stored in our cluster to enable TLS. So yes, we're definitely going to be installing and using cert-manager. So good question. All right. Okay, so we talked about kind of what we're doing, why we're doing it. We've talked about what you need to have set up if you're following along. And like I said, this is what we're going to be building today. So this is a complicated diagram. And if you don't understand it right now, that's okay. I think you'll understand it a lot more thoroughly at the end of the talk. But basically, I think the important parts right now are this very opening part on the left side of the diagram that says user traffic. And then this blue block here, it says DOKS, that's DigitalOcean Kubernetes Service Cluster. And then we have all these things running in the cluster. And then outside of the cluster, we have a load balancer. We have to do something with DigitalOcean DNS. And then we have Let's Encrypt. So we're going to be installing NGINX in the cluster. We're going to be installing cert-manager. We're going to be installing one of these applications, the quote service. And then we're going to be interacting with these things outside of the cluster. And so let's talk about step by step what we're going to be doing. Ooh, okay. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to install the NGINX Ingress Controller inside the Kubernetes cluster. And in doing that, we're also going to create an external load balancer where all of our traffic is going to go to first. And when you're using a cloud provider and you create a load balancer like that, the cloud provider sets up their own load balancer. So we're going to be using a DigitalOcean load balancer. So here's what we're going to be doing. Let's see. I want to go back real fast. I guess I don't have it. Oh, okay. Here we go. So now we're at the part where I'm going to do the demo. And so here are the things that we're going to do. I'm going to install an NGINX Ingress Controller in the cluster. Then I'm going to configure DNS so that my domain name is linked with the load balancer in the cluster. Then I'm going to create one backend service inside the cluster where we want to route traffic to. Then I'm going to configure the NGINX Ingress rules. Then I'll configure a TLS certificate using cert-manager and Let's Encrypt. And then I'm going to enable proxy protocol so that we still know what client IP addresses are when traffic comes into the cluster. So my slides didn't line up quite as perfectly as I was hoping, but that's okay. Okay, so first thing we're going to do, install the Ingress NGINX controller and create a DigitalOcean load balancer. And so let's get started with that. So first thing is I'm on my command line and I have a Kubernetes cluster up and running. Like I said, it's a DigitalOcean cluster. And whenever I'm starting something with a cluster, I just like to poke around in kind of a general way. So first thing I'll do is say kube control get nodes. Make sure I can see. Excellent. So I have 3 worker nodes running. And then I like to do kube control, get pods from all namespaces to see what's in here. All right. So the only namespace right now that has anything running in it is the kube system namespace. So kube system is where the services that keep your cluster up and running get installed. And unless you're a Kubernetes administrator, you usually don't mess with the kube system namespace too much. So uh, I'm going to be creating some namespaces and putting things in there. And then the thing that I want to do is I want to create an ingress and a load balancer, and I'm going to use Ingress NGINX. So how do I figure out how to do that? So let me go back to my browser. Oops. Maybe. There we go. And I'm going to go to the Kubernetes package manager, like repository of projects, which is called Artifact Hub. So it's artifacthub.io. And we see this is the page that you land on. It says find, install, and publish Kubernetes packages. I want to install a package called Ingress NGINX. And when I search that, there are multiple packages with that name. And so I have to figure out which one I want. And the one I want is the top one. And the way that I know that is the Kubernetes organization is what maintains this project. And so I'm going to go here. And thank you, Jimmy. That was my cat, Bowie, just running by. So you might see some cats in the background as I go. So I'm on the Ingress NGINX Artifact Hub page, which is going to give me all of the information that I need to know how to use Helm to install and configure the Ingress. Let's see. Okay, Vinod asks a good question. So this is forward-looking. They say, with certificate, are we securing the traffic between Ingress NGINX and the Kubernetes service? What about traffic between pod to pod? Is that also going to be secured with certs? I'm not going to be able to show you that today. So I'm going to be showing you how we do TLS termination at the Ingress NGINX controller. If I would recommend researching how to do pod-to-pod traffic, encrypting that. And then we've got Mason saying, come for the Kubernetes, stay for the cats. Hi, Mason. Mason's one of my colleagues at DigitalOcean. All right, so back to the Artifact Hub. So I'm at the Ingress NGINX Helm chart, and I really like the Artifact Hub because you get a lot of information about it. It tells you what the prerequisites are. In Helm, you have to add the project's repository before you install the chart. And then it gives you those commands, and then gives you lots of different like values, ways you can configure the chart. So first thing that I want to do is it says get the repo info. And so let's go back to my command line. If I say Helm repo list, these are all of the Helm repos that I already have installed on my local machine. And I don't see Ingress NGINX there. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this command, and we'll look at that on the command line. So it's Helm repo add Ingress NGINX, and then it has a URL for that repository. So let's add that repo. And it's always best practice, Helm repo update Ingress NGINX, to just run the update command right afterward to make sure you have the most up-to-date version. Beautiful. And then it says install the chart. So we'll do that in just a moment. Bleeb84 made a comment. They said they didn't know the existence of this website. I assume it's the Artifact Hub. It's interesting. It is really interesting. You can get so much information about Helm charts here. So I highly recommend poking around. If you use Helm, use the Artifact Hub. All right, so the next instruction is how to install the chart. And if you've ever used NGINX before, maybe just on like a raw bare metal server, you know that NGINX comp file that comes preloaded when you install NGINX. It's like that huge file that has all sorts of different options in it and how you configure your NGINX server. So we're using the same thing. We're creating that on our Kubernetes, in our Kubernetes cluster. And if you go down here to values, you can see some of the configuration options that you can set. And so these are some things. Let's see, I'm trying to see one that looks controller annotations. All right, what about if we get out of the controller section? Oh, there we go. Okay, image pull secrets, default backend. So just a lot of ways that you can configure your Nginx ingress in your Kubernetes cluster. I want to show you the big values file that has all of the different options listed. So this is the Ingress NGINX GitHub repo, and we'll bump this up a little bit. But these are all of the different possibilities for how you can configure your Ingress, your Nginx instance. And if we just scroll down to the bottom, there's just a lot of lines. That's all I want you to see is there's, okay, this particular file is 923 lines. So there are a lot of options, and that can be really overwhelming. We're not going to do all that. I have something relatively at least it has way fewer lines than that set up to go. So I've got this file here, and I have some configurations options set up. And so starting on line 4, I'm just talking about the controller, and this is related to Bleeb's comment. So they say, by default, Nginx gets deployed with one replica. Is it advanced to run multiple replicas for redundancy? Yep, depending on the size of your cluster, you probably want multiple replicas running. And so I'm going to run 2 replicas of my Ingress Nginx, and then I'm setting some resource requests. So I'm saying my node that this pod gets installed on needs at least 100 Ms of CPU and 90 megabytes of memory. So very basic, but just putting some constraints on that. So you can see some things I have commented out. We'll be looking at those later. But let's install Ingress Nginx in my Kubernetes cluster, and let's pass it this values file to configure it. So there are 2 replicas of Ingress Nginx running. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a namespace, an S for namespace, called Ingress-Nginx. Well, I didn't do it right, so I have to say create. So cube control, create namespace, Ingress Nginx. And if I say cube control get namespaces, we see that namespace there. And now what I'm going to do, I have this command saved, is I'm going to install the Ingress Nginx Helm chart, and it gets installed as a release. I'm going to call that release Ingress Nginx, and I'm going to pass it my values file. So here's what the command looks like. So you say Helm install, and then the name of your release is next. So I'm calling it Ingress Nginx. And then you say which Helm chart you want to get it from. So I'm saying, hey, I want the Ingress Nginx Helm chart from the Ingress Nginx Helm repository. I'm installing this in the Ingress Nginx namespace, and then I'm passing it that file that I just showed you, which is called nginxvalues.yaml. So we'll hit install there. And it might take a little while. Let's see, just scrolling back through the comments. All right, we'll let that install, and we'll just review what are we installing. So what we're doing right now is we're installing the Nginx Ingress Controller, which is going to be inside the Kubernetes cluster. And the other thing that Ingress Nginx is doing automatically is it's creating a load balancer service, which is going to have DigitalOcean create a load balancer. We're going to get a public IP address on that load balancer, and that's where our user traffic is going to go. All right, so this looks like good news. Okay, so we get this this message from Helm. It basically says, hey, I created a Helm release called Ingress Nginx. It is deployed, and then the Ingress Nginx team has given us an example Ingress that we can use. We'll do that in a few minutes. And then it says, if TLS is enabled for the Ingress, a secret containing the certificate and key must also be provided. So we actually are going to do this later. And so we're going to have a secret in the same namespace as whatever service that we're deploying. So beautiful. All right, well, let's take a look in the Ingress Nginx namespace. So cube control, I'm going to get all resources from the namespace Ingress Nginx, and we'll just see what we find. All right, excellent. So there are our 2 replicas of the Ingress Nginx controller that are running. So we have 2 pods running that. So we've got a little bit more availability there. we've got two different services that were created. The first one is the load balancer service. And this is really exciting where it says external IP. DigitalOcean is spinning up their own load balancer right now. And we're going to get an IP address that we can actually access, which is exciting. It takes a few minutes in general for those to be created. We also have this other service, Ingress NGINX Controller Admission. It's got an IP address that is only available inside the cluster. So that's part of the Ingress NGINX system. Then we have the deployment and replica set. So let's run the command again. Actually, we'll just get services. I want to get the external IP address for my service. Okay, it's still pending. So we'll have to come back to that in just a second. Beautiful. All right. Actually, I don't want to skip that. So let me go to the DigitalOcean Cloud Console. All right. So I'm here. And this is the name of my DigitalOcean Managed Kubernetes cluster, Ingress NGINX Demo. And I'm looking for the load balancer, let's see. Okay, let's go to networking, see if we find the load balancer there. Okay, I'm going to go to the load balancer tab. Okay, so this is, it looks like it just turned on. So this is my load balancer. DigitalOcean is managing that. I've got this public IP address. And if I put that address in my browser, this is great news. I'm getting the 404 page from NGINX. So I have this web server up and running. And when I go to that public IP address, something's happening with NGINX. And so what I want to do now is I want to make this IP address work for me. So let's go back, take a look at the agenda. So what we just did was install the Ingress controller inside the cluster. That also created the DigitalOcean load balancer. So now we have a public IP address where we can direct our user traffic to. And so the next thing that I want to do, we've already done that, is I want to configure my DNS. And so I have a domain name. I want to set it up so that DigitalOcean has access to it. And instead of having my users having to type in that IP address, I want to give them a domain where they can type in the address and have access to whatever application's running that way. So let's configure DigitalOcean DNS. So first thing is you have to have a domain name that you've purchased from a registrar. So there are a lot of registrars. Google is one, GoDaddy is another, Namecheap is one. My registrar of choice is name.com. And the reason is that they're located in Denver, Colorado, and that's where I live. And so I bought this domain from name.com. So the domain is kubetips.online. And the first thing that I already did, because I didn't want you to have to wait for this, is I changed the name servers that were initially name.com's name servers. I changed the name servers to point to DigitalOcean's name servers. So here it says manage name servers. It's ns1.digitalocean.com, ns2.digitalocean.com, ns3.digitalocean.com. I did that last night, so you didn't have to watch me do that. But if you are watching this and following along, if you go to this, oops, that's the IP address for my load balancer. All right, if you go to this part of the DigitalOcean documentation, point to DigitalOcean name servers from common domain registrars. This gives you instructions for how to do this with any name registrar. So you can see name.com is here, and GoDaddy, HostGator, all sorts of them. But if you go here, it'll show you in images what to do. So I highly recommend doing that. And then Zam says, DigitalOcean needs to offer domain purchasing through them. That would be nice. But for now, you have to do that separately outside of your DigitalOcean account. All right. So I have kubetips.online. And now what I need to do is I need to get this connected with my DigitalOcean account. And so I'm back at my project. This one's called Sammy at the Helm. You see my Kubernetes cluster in here. And now I want my DigitalOcean account to know about that domain. So I'm going to go down to Manage DNS on DigitalOcean. And you can see I already have 2 other domains here, but I want to be able to manage kubetips.online. And I'm going to add that domain. Standing. All right, so we've got kubetips online. And then what I'm going to do, let's go back. I'm going to be deploying one application, and it's going to be this quote service over here. And the way that users are going to be able to access that is they're going to use the subdomain quote.kubetips.online. And so what I need to do is I need to create an A record, an address record, that when somebody types in quote.kubetips.online, that DNS can say, oh, I actually know the IP address of that particular thing, which is the load balancer in my Kubernetes cluster or outside of my Kubernetes cluster. So the way that I do that is I'm going to, let's see, I'm creating a new address record, an A record. I'm going to say quote, and then it's already filling in kubetips.online because that's the domain that I want to use. And then it's going to direct to which IP address. These are my Kubernetes worker nodes. I don't want, those aren't open to the public, but the IP or the IP address of the load balancer is. So I'm going to direct to that load balancer, and I'm going to create that record. It says a record. I don't know if it's a record or like the A record was created successfully. But you see here under DNS records that I've got the host name, quote.kubetips.online directs to the address of my load balancer. So outstanding. I think that might be it. Let me check my notes. Yeah, beautiful. All right, let's go back to the presentation. So where are we? What are we doing? We've created the Ingress NGINX Controller. We've created the DigitalOcean load balancer. And then what we just did was we configured DigitalOcean DNS. And so the next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to deploy this service in my Kubernetes cluster. It's called the quote service. Yeah, we're going to create the backend service, and then I'm also going to configure the NGINX Ingress rules, but we'll come back to that in just a second. All right, so I want to deploy an application in my cluster. That's the whole point of Kubernetes, is that you're deploying and orchestrating containers, and those containers create microservices that talk to one another, and some of those services are available for users on the internet to access. And so I'm going to open up this directory in my text editor and show you what I have up and running. Ooh, Swami has a good question about the last section. So they say, can we just create the A record in the registrar's DNS portal instead of moving name servers? You can do that, especially for what I'm showing you today. When that gets complicated is if you want to use a wildcard certificate. So in order to set up a wildcard certificate using cert-manager and Let's Encrypt, you have to be able to edit text records from inside the Kubernetes cluster. And that's when you want to have your A record set up through DigitalOcean DNS. So the answer is yes in some cases and no in others. But yeah, I understand the impulse to want to keep those, maybe all of your DNS records in just one place. Good question. All right, so I have a directory here. It's called quote, and I have this Kubernetes manifest, and let's just take a look at it. So the manifest contains two YAML specs. One is for a deployment, and one is for a service. And if we look at the deployment is called quote. I want one replica to be running, and it is going to live in the backend namespace. And it's pulling this image to create the container. So this image was created by DataWire, which is now called Ambassador Labs. And it's a nice image. It's like a public API that you can use to practice things in Kubernetes or with containers. And what it does is it just delivers you a JSON object of a random quote. And so that's the thing that we hope to be seeing. So we see resource requests and limits, best practice in Kubernetes. So we're going to create one pod running a container of this quote service. And then the next thing that we've got is a service. And so in Kubernetes, that's the thing that has a stable API, or not a stable API. Let me start that again. In Kubernetes, a service is a thing that has a stable IP address so that when your pods come and go, they're meant to be reusable. They're meant to be spun up and be spun down, and their IP addresses always change. But your service, the IP address stays the same. So when traffic hits the load balancer, it goes to the Ingress NGINX Controller. Ingress NGINX is going to send that traffic to the service instead of the pod. Since the service is stable. So let's create these two things. I have it in this file called deployment, and that's in the quote directory. Excellent. So I'm going to say kube apply the file in the quote directory, and it's called deployment. Oh, but before I do that, I need to create a namespace. Kube create a namespace called backend. So I'm going to be deploying the service in that namespace. Let's see. Did I specify the namespace in here? Yep, I did. So I don't need to put that in the command. Since I didn't run that command, it's not there anymore. So now let me create the quote pod kube apply file, and it's the quote directory, and the file with the two manifests is called deployment. All right, so we're applying that. Go, go, go. There we go. It says deployment was created and a service was created. Let's just take a look at that. So kube get all from the namespace backend. Beautiful, just what I expected. So we have one replica of that pod running, and it's here. We have the service, which is also running. It's called quote. Here's that stable IP address. So it's going to be running there. We can send traffic there, and then that service will direct traffic to pods. If we had more than one pod running, the service could load balance over those pods. And then the deployment replica set are just help us determine how many replicas we have running. All right. So actually, that is one of the steps. This is a nice step that doesn't take too long. Let's see. Beautiful. So we just created the backend service. So I've got a check mark over the quote service. In the repo that we shared, they also tell you how to deploy a second service called the Echo service. I'm not going to show you the Echo service today, but feel free to do that. So that's why there's no check mark and there'll be no boxes on that. All right. And so now the next thing that we need to do is we need the Ingress controller to know, hey, when do I send traffic to that quote service? And so we're going to configure the Ingress rules. So let's see. Well, I'm jumping ahead too far. Pretend you didn't see that. All right. All right. So when we checked for everything running in the backend namespace, we saw a pod and a service. And now we have to create a new object called an ingress. And this is where we're going to configure the rules that tell the ingress controller, hey, when these things are true, you direct traffic to that quote service. So back to the text editor. I've already got this set up, and it's in a file called ingress.yaml. And if we look here, so we're going to create a new Kubernetes resource called an ingress. It's going to be named ingress quote, and it's going to reside in the backend namespace. And we'll talk about these commented out parts in a little bit, but let's look at the rules. This is what we're configuring. So the first thing is we're configuring the host. And in NGINX, host, I think that's an Apache term, but it's used a lot in NGINX. And it's just basically saying, like, I would like my server to be able to host multiple domains and like direct traffic based on those domains. And so the host that I'm going to be specifying these rules for are the quotes. And then I've got your domain. So it's quote .cubetips.online. And we're saying, hey, when somebody requests that particular domain name, well, the first thing it's going to do is the DNS stuff is going to happen, and it's going to say, here's the IP address. And then once that request gets to the Ingress NGINX controller, it's going to say, oh, I have a set of rules for what to do with quote.cubetips.online. And when it's just the base path, I'm going to direct that traffic to the quote service. And I want to use the port 8080. And I'm doing all of this with the Ingress NGINX controller. You can have multiple controllers running in a cluster. And if you have that happening, you want to specify the Ingress class name saying like, oh, I want my Ingress NGINX to be handling this, or I want my Ambassador Labs Ingress to be doing this. So let's see if this works. So I'm going to create this Ingress object in the backend namespace. Is that, yep, that namespace is specified. So I'm going to say kube control, apply the file in the quote directory, and it's called Ingress. Beautiful. And so let's say kube control from the namespace backend, get ingresses. Excellent. And we just see some of that information that we configured in that YAML file. So the name of that ingress is ingress quote. It's using Nginx. It's the quote.kubetips.online host. No address. Let's see if that changes. Well, it hasn't changed yet. I think that is going to change. All right. So let's see what happens. So first thing we'll try is, can we access quote.kubetips.online from a browser? Let's see. Nope. This is always the part of the talk that's embarrassing because I've lost my windows. There we go. All right. So, okay, if you remember, we typed in the address of our load balancer and we got the Nginx 404 not found page. So if I did quote.kubetips.online, will I get anything? Okay, so I actually got, this is what the quote service gives you. It gives you a random server name and a quote abstraction is ever present, which is extremely pertinent for Kubernetes and cloud computing. And then it gives us a timestamp. And Matson, thank you so much. I sometimes don't celebrate. Oh my gosh, you guys, it works. This is so exciting. I configured my DNS so that when somebody asks for this domain, it gets sent to that load balancer and then the ingress controller, and then it gets sent to the quote service, and then the user gets this back in return. Jimmy B, absolutely. Sometimes these randomly generated names are weird. I also love buttery tangerines. But you'll see here, it says not secure. And so let's take a look and see what Chrome is telling me. So Chrome is like, your connection to the site isn't secure. Basically, like, we don't like the certificate that it's giving us. And so if we go down, oh, no, that's not what I wanted. Let's see, maybe learn more. Oh, I really just want to see, because Ingress NGINX generates, I think, a self-signed certificate, and I want to see that information, but this isn't doing what I was expecting, but that's okay. So let's just make the same request using curl and see what kind of information we get. So I'm going to say curl -li, and I'm going to say HTTP quote. Oh, and you can go to this site too if you're watching live. I'm not sure. I might pull this down after the talk, but quote.kubetips.online. Okay. All right, so we're seeing this uses HTTP1. Yep, looks good. We're getting, okay, we got a new quote because that was a new request. The last sentence you read is often sensible nonsense. All right. So Jimmy says, you might be able to get certificate information in the learn more section. So not secure, learn more. Yeah, I feel like this is like the documentation. I actually want to see the certificate though. But that's okay. We'll keep going. All right. So we have something on the internet, but a lot of people aren't going to be able to access that because it's not secure. We don't have a certificate from a certificate authority saying like, hey, I can verify that Kim owns that domain. And so you don't have to worry too much about her trying to trick you. So let's figure that out. So we'll close out some of these tabs. We'll see where we're at and keep going. Okay, so the green check marks are all the things that we've got set up. and here's what's to come. So what we're going to do next is we are going to install the cert-manager project. And cert-manager is a lot of software that helps you provision certificates inside your Kubernetes cluster. And think back to when we installed, I guess it was Ingress NGINX. The Helm chart gave us some tips. They were like, hey, you need to create an ingress and configure those rules. And then you need a secret containing like a certificate somewhere in your cluster. So cert-manager is going to help us do all of that. cert-manager works with lots of different projects. We're going to be using Let's Encrypt to be our certificate authority because it's a wonderful nonprofit that generates certificates for you for free. And then you can also set up cert-manager and Let's Encrypt to renew your certificates automatically so you don't have to remember it, which is wonderful. And then using cert-manager and Let's Encrypt, we're going to put a production TLS certificate. It's going to be stored inside the cluster as a secret. And so we'll take a look at that. All right, so our next step is to configure the TLS certificate. And as you just saw, there's like 3 different things that are working. Ooh, I got a good tip from Luca. They said, you need to specify HTTPS to see the certificate. Let's try that. Thank you, Luca. So if I say HTTPS, quote, oh, that's a different domain I was using to practice. So quote.cube.tips.online. Aha, love it. Thank you, Luca. I appreciate the help. Okay, so this is just what I wanted to show you. Chrome's like, nope, this isn't safe. And if you go up here, it says the certificate is not valid. And then I wish I could I wish I could make this bigger, but I don't think I can. It just says Kubernetes Ingress Controller fake certificate, which is not a real certificate. So it's a self-signed certificate that got generated with Ingress NGINX, and you can look at the details here. Kubernetes Ingress Controller fake certificate. So here is the fake certificate that your browser will not like. So we want to change that. We want to have a real certificate from the certificate authority. Let's encrypt. All right. So first thing we need to do is we need to install the cert-manager Helm chart in our cluster. And so let's go back to Artifact Hub and let's find cert-manager. And like before, there are multiple published Helm charts called cert-manager, but we want the official one, which this is nice. There's this tag here that says official, and then the org is cert-manager. All right. And let's just see what the very high-level description of cert-manager is. It says cert-manager is a Kubernetes add-on to automate the management and issuance of TLS certificates from various issuing sources. It will ensure certificates are valid and up to date periodically and attempt to renew certificates at an appropriate time before they expire. Wonderful. Love that sort of automation. All right, so we've got information about how to install the chart. Okay, so there are 2 options. It's not 2 options. There are 2 steps. The first thing we have to do is we have to install the cert-manager custom resource definitions. And so we need to have some cert-manager Kubernetes objects that we interact with. And the way that you do that is you run this command. And last night I was practicing for the talk and I kept not running this command, but installing the Helm chart. And then I kept encountering errors because cert-manager was asking for resources that didn't exist in my cluster. So this step is pretty important. And you can see I created a certificate request. Actually, let's just look. Kube control get CRDs. And then things that cert-manager installed end with cert-manager.io. So we created a new object called a certificate request. We'll look at that. The actual certificate, that's the thing that we saw in that diagram. There's an Acme challenge to make sure that certificate that Let's Encrypt can actually verify that you own your domain. And then we have Cilium stuff. And then we have cluster issuers and orders. So we'll take a look at all those things in just a couple of minutes. And the next thing that I want to do is I need to add the JetStack Helm repository to my Helm instance. And so let's just copy this in here. And I'm saying Helm repo, add JetStack. Excellent. And if I say Helm repo, list all of the repos that I have, there's JetStack at the bottom. And let's update that just to be safe. Helm repo, update JetStack. Excellent, looking good. And then I'm going to do the Helm installation, but like Ingress NGINX, I want some custom values passed in through a file. And so this is called cert-manager values. And this is a very pithy 8 lines. So I want to install the CRDs. I already did that manually, but we can leave this here. It won't do anything. Just check if it's done. And then if I want to monitor cert-manager activity by scraping Prometheus metrics, I would enable that. I'm not doing that right now. So it is listed as false. All right, I need a big, long command, which I have in my notes. First thing, create a namespace, kubectl create namespace, cert-manager, so we can have all that stuff in one place. And then I'm going to install cert-manager. And so I used version 171 to install the custom resource definitions. You really want to make sure that you have the same version using your Helm chart. So I'm going to specify that version number. So you can see I've got Helm installed. The release name is cert-manager. In the namespace cert-manager, version 171 from the JetStack repository cert-manager. And then please use the cert-manager values. So we'll hit install there. And we'll let that go. Oh, installation failed. It says rendered manifest contain a resource that already exists. I was wrong. Let's change this to false. So since I installed the CRDs using that kubectl apply command, I think that's why it's erroring out. So let's try that again. Oh, that didn't help at all. Okay, well, all right, while we're waiting, let's go back and just take a look at what we're up to. And so what we're doing right now is installing cert-manager. Created a cert-manager namespace, added the CRDs, and then now we're installing the Helm charts. Excellent. This is the thing I want to see. It's that Helm message. Hey, I deployed cert-manager. Gives me some instructions. In order to begin issuing certificates, you will need to set up a cluster issuer or issuer resource. More information on the different types of issuers and how to configure them can be found in our documentation. So let's go to the documentation and see what we find. Right, so there are different ways of having certificates issued using cert-manager. You can do self-sign, a certificate authority. You can use HashiCorp Vault, Venafi, External, and Acme. We're using, I believe, the CA. Actually, no, we're using, we're using CA. We're using Let's Encrypt as the CA. This isn't quite what I wanted to show you. I already have the tab open. This is what I wanted to show you. So this is the cert-manager docs. And it's just showing you sort of how the project works. So you have cert-manager, and then you choose an issuer. And so, like I said, you can use Venafi, you can use HashiCorp Vault. We're going to be using Let's Encrypt. Let's Encrypt is wonderful. They have 2 servers where you can send requests to get certificate. One is a staging server. So in your staging environment, if you want to make sure that you've got things configured properly to get a certificate, you can make requests against their staging server. They also have a production server where you get those real certificates. So outstanding. What we're going to do is we're going to be using the Let's Encrypt prod server. And then cert-manager creates the actual certificate inside of your Kubernetes cluster. And so like this example here. And then the signed key pair is stored as a Kubernetes secret. All right. So we have installed cert-manager. Now we want to tell cert-manager to use Let's Encrypt as the issuer. So it can give us a production TLS certificate. So back here, we have our issuer.yaml file. I'm going to get rid of that at the top. And so this is a Kubernetes resource, one of those custom resources that cert-manager created. So it's this kind issuer. There are two kinds of issuers. There's an issuer, which is bound by a namespace. So if you want to create certificates for something in one namespace, use an issuer. There's also something called a cluster issuer, where if you want any namespace to have access to that certificate, I would use that one. We're going to use the issuer just to keep it simple and straightforward. The issuer, we're going to call it Let's Encrypt NGINX. If you are doing that thing where you have a staging and then a production issuer, you can say Let's Encrypt Staging, Let's Encrypt Prod. I mean, you can name this whatever you want, but we're going to keep it as is. Let's encrypt NGINX. And this issuer is going to be working in the backend namespace. Remember, that's where the quote service is deployed. And then some nice documentation in here. So first thing is we have to give Let's Encrypt a valid email. So my work email is kschlesinger@digitalocean.com. And then you say which Let's Encrypt server you're making those requests to. This is the URL for the production server. I believe it's like staging for the other one. So we'll just leave that as is. And then private key secret ref. We want to create that signed key pair as a secret called Let's Encrypt NGINX private key. And then how is Let's Encrypt going to verify that I own this domain? We're going to use the HTTP 01 challenge. And so when I spin this up, cert-manager, Let's Encrypt, it's somewhere going to create an HTTP endpoint from inside the cluster that it can then ping, and then it can say like, oh, because I was able to create this endpoint and I can access it, that must mean you own this domain. Cool, here's a certificate. All right, so there's a lot of words. Let's just apply this. Cube control, apply, file, issuer. And as we do this, we're going to look at all of those different cert-manager. Sorry, I got distracted. We're going to look at all those custom resources that cert-manager created. So Felipe has a great question. Will the files be available after this presentation? All the files are actually already available in that starter kit link that we posted at the beginning. We'll post it again right now. But yes, they're available right now for you. So go ahead and take a... Actually, why am I just saying it? I'm just going to show you. I'm sorry. Okay. So this is the starter kit. And this thing has so much good information in it. We just posted the link here. Thank you so much. And we're working through 03 setup Ingress Controller. And so for the specific files for Ingress NGINX, if you go to Assets and then Manifests, and you'll see like the Ingress or the NGINX values, the cert-manager values, and then NGINX, all of the stuff is in here. So let's see, like the quote host, that's what I call the issuer. No, that's the Ingress. Let's see. NGINX. What did I just make? I made the issuer. Cert-manager issuer. Yep. All right, here. Yes, I'm so glad you like this repo, Jimmy. We've spent a lot of work on it, so we're really proud of it. So yes, that's exactly the file that I just applied in my Kubernetes cluster. And okay, so let's go back. Now we kind of want to see, how does cert-manager work? How does it talk to Let's Encrypt? How does Let's Encrypt generate that certificate? So first thing I'm going to do is I just want to look at the secrets in the backend namespace. So Q control get secrets namespace backend. Interesting. All right. So you can see 2 minutes and 5 seconds ago, when I ran that command, I created this Let's Encrypt NGINX private key. So we have like the private key stored in this backend namespace, which we saw instructions telling us to do that a lot. We'll come back to this in a couple of minutes. but kube control get CRDs, and I'm going to grep on cert-manager. I just want to inspect like what's going on. So let's see. The first thing is let's see what is a cert-manager order. So kube control get order from the namespace cert-manager. Oops, wrong namespace. It's in the backend namespace. Oh, okay. It looks like I don't have any orders going, so maybe the certificate already was issued. But let's look at we can come back to that. Let's look at the issuer. So let's see. I like having my namespace up front in the command, so then when I go up, I can just add to the end. So kube control namespace backend get issuer. All right, so I have the Let's Encrypt NGINX issuer. So this is the object that says like, hey, make your certificate requests against the Let's Encrypt API. So that looks like it's up and running. We shouldn't have any cluster issuers because I specified an issuer, not a cluster issuer. Let's look at challenges and see if maybe that HTTP01 challenge is working. Get challenges. Nope, doesn't look like it. Uh-oh, I'm feeling a little nervous. Like maybe I didn't do something right, but that's okay. Let's look at certificate requests. See if we have a request for a certificate up and running. Nope. And then, all right, let's see. Do we have a certificate? Maybe it happened really fast. Get certificate. No. All right. That is making me nervous. So I was expecting to see an order. The order is the thing that says like, okay, I'm going to make a challenge against with Let's Encrypt, and we're going to create that HTTP endpoint. And once we verify that we can access that endpoint, that you own the domain, we'll issue the certificate. So let me just look at my notes and see if I maybe didn't do something. All right, we'll actually go to the starter kit. So we're doing NGINX, and I am configuring production ready TLS certificates. Okay. Cert-manager values, I think I did pass that in. And then I've got cert-manager. Okay, we've got all that stuff from cert-manager. We looked at the custom resource definitions. Did I apply the issuer? Did I change the ingress? That's a good question. Oh, I don't think I have done that yet. First of all, let me just make sure I have an issuer. Okay, let me clear this out. Kube control, issuer from all namespaces. Yeah, I already checked this. I have that Let's Encrypt NGINX. Beautiful. Okay. You need to configure the Ingress NGINX to use TLS. Yep, I think Bleeb84 is right. All right, so I created an issuer, but now I need to reconfigure my ingress so that it knows to use Let's Encrypt NGINX as the cert manager. So back to this, back to my ingress. And so I already have these things in here. I have to add an annotation to this ingress that's just says cert-manager.io, and the issuer is Let's Encrypt NGINX. It's got to match the name here. So those look good. And then I need to add this block of TLS configuration, hosts, so quote, and it is kubetips.online. All right, and let's apply that. Kube control, apply file, quote, and then that is called ingress. All right, so it looks like it updated that. And so now, kube control, namespace backend. I'm curious if I have any orders. Aha! Thank you, Bleeb84. All right, so now I have this order that says it is pending. So cert manager is saying, hello, I would like a certificate for this quote host. And then I'm going to look at, let's see, we've got issuer order. Let's look at certificate requests. So we've made a request for a certificate. This takes a few minutes. So It says it's approved. Oh, it says it's ready. Maybe it's all ready. All right, let's see if we've got a certificate in the backend namespace. Wow, that happened so fast. All right, here is the big trial. Hey, all right. So Matson is right. It works. So if I use HTTPS, I see this has a valid certificate. And if I go to connection is secure, certificate is valid. So before the certificate was like, what was it called? Like Kubernetes dummy certificate. This says, hey, here's your certificate. It's valid. And if we go to details, we'll see that the issuer is Let's Encrypt, and we've got all this information here. So nice. So now we've got, we've got like a nice secure website that we can feel good about sending customers to. So yes, this is so exciting. All right. Well, if we take a look here, we installed cert-manager. We set up cert-manager to use Let's Encrypt as the issuer, and then we have a production TLS certificate. Let's look again at, sorry, let me clear this. Cube control, get secrets from the backend namespace. So we have two secrets here. We have the private key, but we actually have like the TLS certificate stored as a secret here. And so cert-manager and Let's Encrypt work together to put that here. So that is, let's see, go to my browser, please. All right, there we go. So that's the production TLS certificate, living as a Kubernetes secret in the cluster. Awesome. So we've done all of this, and there is one more thing that we need to do, and that is to enable proxy protocol. And there's no part of the diagram for this. And so basically what happens is because we have that DigitalOcean load balancer with its IP address. The traffic is hitting that load balancer, and then the load balancer is forwarding the traffic to the Ingress controller. If we want to get client IP addresses for logging purposes or that our application needs, it's all going to be the same address of the DigitalOcean load balancer. And what we want instead is we want to know what is the actual IP address of the person or machine that made that request. And so in order to do that, we enable proxy protocol. And so we need to go back to our Ingress NGINX values. And there's two things that we need to do. Let's see. I need to, let's see. That's not working the way I wanted it to. I'm going to uncomment out these things. And so this is for the load balancer that Ingress NGINX spun up. I'm saying enable proxy protocol, true. And then this says specify whether the DigitalOcean load balancer should pass encrypted data to backend droplets. So I'm going to say, yes, I want that encrypted data to come through. And then the last thing is I want to set these configuration options. So use proxy protocol is the only thing that I care about right now, but I'm going to uncomment these as well, just adding to the NGINX config. So, all right, I'm going to, let's see. Yeah. Okay, so since I installed Ingress NGINX using Helm, I need to update my Helm release using Helm. And so the way I'm going to do that is instead of Helm create, it's going to be Helm upgrade, and I'm passing in that values file. Uh-oh, I think I missed the most important part, which is to show you how that works. So let me see if I can curl before this changes. Quote.kubetips.online. All right. So that was my request. You see this come back, and okay, so it looks like that Ingress NGINX has been updated. So we'll run that command again. Xage. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to show you difference here, unfortunately. But that's all right. So I've enabled proxy protocol. It's a little more invisible than some of the other things. All right, so back to presentation. We're nearing the end here. So we enabled proxy protocol. So look at all those green check marks. Look at us. Thanks for hanging with me. Let's get to the recap. So what we did today was a lot of things. We are making sure that we've got encrypted traffic coming into our cluster, and that also gives our users the assurance that we own the domain and that we're a safe site. And so the first thing that we did was we installed the NGINX Ingress Controller inside of a DigitalOcean managed Kubernetes cluster, which also spun up that DigitalOcean load balancer. That load balancer has the public IP address where all of the traffic goes. Then we configured DNS. So I bought a domain from name.com and I switched the name servers to use DigitalOcean name servers. And then I added an A record saying, hey, anyone who goes to quote.kubetips.online, I want them to have access to the data in the quote service. So then I deployed the quote service inside the Kubernetes cluster. I created an ingress object and told my ingress controller, hey, I want you to direct any traffic that starts quote kubetips.online to the quote service. And you see that happening when we get the quotes. Here's an example. We're using curl as the client. I see lots of questions. I promise I'll get to them in just a second. Okay. All right. And then we were able to, Felipe says, need to create a TLS ingress resource first. So then we installed cert-manager in the cluster. We said, cert-manager, we'd like you to generate certificates using Let's Encrypt as the certificate authority. And then we store that production TLS certificate in the backend namespace so that the quote service can serve up encrypted traffic. And you may be wondering to yourself, okay, this is cool, but what if I don't want to configure a certificate for every namespace or for every service? And the answer to that question is wildcard certificates. So this link here is part of the starter kit that I shared with you, and it gives you instructions for how to configure a wildcard certificate. So instead of saying, I want a certificate for quote.kubetips.online and echo.kubetips.online, you just want a wildcard certificate that says star. So anything in front of kubetips.online, I want to use one certificate. There are instructions here. It's more advanced because, like I mentioned earlier, answering a question, you have to be able to edit DNS text records in order to prove that that you own that domain. So we use the HTTP01 challenge here. You have to use the DNS challenge for the wildcard certificates. So take a look at that if you're interested. But that is a more advanced, but ultimately more efficient way of issuing certificates. So thank you so much. I'm going to answer a few questions and then we'll be done. So beautiful. Okay, so Valdini says, will this video be available here on Twitch? So yes, this video will live on Twitch for 2 weeks, but then it will be deleted per Twitch rules. But the video of this talk will be stored on YouTube as permanently as we can make it. So you can watch the video there. Thank you so much, Mike. It was wonderful to have you here. Kazda sounds great. Let's see. Vinod says, when we provision Ingress controller, then load balancer runs on DigitalOcean. Is it outside or inside the DigitalOcean Kubernetes cluster? It's inside the VPC that has your Kubernetes cluster, but it's not inside the Kubernetes cluster. It's on the outside of it. Thank you, Andre. And then Matson says, are you going to do a talk on Loki? Hopefully sometime in the future I will. That's part of the starter kit. So if you want to take a look, that would be great. So thanks. Great to have you, Juliet. Thank you, Irebox, a friend of DigitalOcean. So thank you all. My name is Kim Schlesinger. You can follow me on all the social media platforms there, and I'll see you for the next Tech Talk. Bye.